I'm sitting here waiting for Abigail to get out of gymnastics, and I sent you guys a note about 15 minutes ago saying that this was on its way. So you're going to have to wait, I guess, a bit longer because it's 8:58, and I am just now starting this process. All right. So tonight, what I want to do is talk to you guys about the Galapagos, and you've heard certainly whenever you hear Darwin's name, the first thing that pops into most people's mind are the archipelago known as the Galapagos Islands. And what I want to talk to you about is why is it that the Galapagos in particular is such a great place to study the concept of evolution. Because it really does help put together a lot of ideas that we've been talking about over the past couple of days. So first of all, here you have a map showing the Galapagos archipelago. And they are created through volcanic eruptions, so they are seamounts that come from underneath the water and then poke above the water as the lava begins to emerge over the top and then cools and becomes a terrestrial ecosystem in the middle of this marine ecosystem. And so what's cool about that is that you actually are, when you have this process called island building, then you also start with an absolutely clean slate. There is nothing that can live in lava. Everything dies when lava comes in contact with it, and it's essentially sterilized. So when the lava erupts and then comes above the surface of the ocean and forms an island, you are talking about a perfect conditions for life to start the way it wants to start. And so you have no sort of invasive species. You don't even have human beings, the most important invasive species that exists out there, coming in here to mess things up. As the volcanic ash starts to cool and solidify into firm terra firma, then you start having the introduction of things. But I want you to notice here too that as you look up in this corner here, this shows the mainland of South America, and there's a huge distance that exists between the mainland of South America. It's Ecuador, actually, that is the country that's right there, and the Galapagos archipelago, which you see blown up in this larger map here. And the cool thing about it is it's far enough away from the mainland to not have any of the mainland species be able to cruise over there easily, but not so far away that a few displaced mainland creatures do reach their way across, mostly in the way of say, vegetation and maybe a bird here or there that gets blown out in a hurricane. But even larger animals that might sort of hitch a ride on a raft of weeds and be carried out deep into this archipelago. And don't forget that if we're talking about millions and millions of years, that's certainly more than enough time for there to be a situation where you have enough of these imports of organisms from the mainland, but not so many that there's perfect gene flow that exists between the organisms in this set of islands and those that are on the mainland. So that's important, that there's not perfect gene flow. All right, so keep that in mind. So no perfect gene flow. And what that means here is if we have a population here, and this is out on the Galapagos, and then we have a population here in Ecuador, and this population, starts to inhabit the Galapagos, and this population, from which that Galapagos population came from, also is hanging out here. Well, over time you could imagine that they're going to have separate gene pools, so that if the Galapagos then has a mutation, let's say a green dot here, but the Ecuadorian population doesn't, perhaps that situation is such that the green dot is actually beneficial out here in the Galapagos, where it's not terribly beneficial in Ecuador. So you would never see it, even if it did develop, since it's not something that's beneficial, you don't see the green moving into the population, whereas in the Galapagos, the green allele might actually be highly successful and may take root there. And eventually, perhaps over millions of years, the green is so successful, and maybe even through genetic drift, but certainly through natural selection, you start to see that there's fixation towards this green allele, and you never see that happen in the mainland. And the way in which this is shown spectacularly is that with the land iguana versus the sea iguanas that we see out in the Galapagos. There are land iguanas that exist in Ecuador in the rainforests that stay in trees their entire lives and never even come down to the surface of the forest floor, the rainforest floor. Whereas in the Galapagos, there are sea iguanas that spend a chunk of their life actually in the water associated with that area where the waves are breaking near the shore. And they are a different shape, they're a different color, but fundamentally you can tell they're obviously iguanas, related to the same iguanas that we saw in Ecuador. So clearly the ancestral stock of the iguana was from Ecuador. But now this is a very important thing to understand. Not only is there a difference potentially in the environment that's associated with Ecuador versus that in the Galapagos Islands, but we also have incredible varieties of ecosystems right here within the different islands that are within a very close distance to one another. I wonder if my daughter's coming out now. I can't see her. Okay, so there are actually 4 fundamental different types of ecosystems that you can find just within the archipelago. Oh, here she is. All right, I'll pick this up in a second. All right, so now I'm back home. Oh yeah, 4 ecosystems that exist in a relatively small area, and these ecosystems are isolated because they're islands, so they're isolated by enough water that it's difficult for the organisms in one island to easily get over to the other islands. All right, and that's an important part. So in other words, they're geographically isolated enough such that it's not going to be easy for them to go from one island to the next. Yet they're close enough so that you could have some freak events that would move organisms from one area to the other. Okay, so those 4 ecosystems. The first of the ecosystems is made up of arid lowlands and open forests that contain a whole bunch of cacti. Shoot, I had to pause things and now I don't remember where I was. All right, I think I'm just talking about the 4 different ecosystems. Did I already mention one? Oh well. So I feel like I did, but we'll just have to go with it. So the first one is the forest, or actually the ecosystem that makes up the arid lowlands, and these which also contains these sort of open forests of such sort. They're not really forests in the sense of that you're thinking of forest, because these things contain giant cacti. I should try to find a picture of this because it's so nuts. Hold on, let me see. Let's see. Oh, here. This is so cool. Look at that. Look how crazy that is. These trees, cactus trees and everything. You can see that these ones are going to be closer to the shoreline, etc. And, oh boy, I didn't give myself enough room here. New page. The second of the types of ecosystems that exist are the subtropical forests. And let's see, let me find subtropical forests are going to be the dudes that look kind of like rainforests. Okay. So imagine that you have that next, and then an island next to it. You have one that looks like a desert ecosystem. It's the craziness of this whole thing. And then we also have, at higher elevations, we have a moist, dense forest. Oh, I didn't plan ahead. I don't have enough room. So If I'm looking at a moist, dense forest, this looks kind of like the tropical forest, but it's a lot more packed in that's going on there, and it's at higher elevation, so it's a little bit cooler and potentially wetter. It's not going to be as affected by the arid lowland areas. And then lastly, we have these treeless upland areas that are covered with ferns and grasses. So, well, I guess I'm going to have to do this. So, treeless fernlands in the upper elevations. Let me see if I can find something there. Alright, so you can see there's the treeless fernlands, which look awesome. I'd love to go hang out in here. But when you take a look at these ecosystems, you can see that they're actually significantly different from each other. The dense forests and the subtropical forests to the sort of arid lowlands. And the important part about this is that if you have a set of organisms that occupy these very different environments, whoa, I just realized I unplugged, hold on, that occupy different types of ecosystems, then they are essentially going to have the same sort of situation that we had between the Galapagos and the Ecuadorian mainland, in that you have different conditions, different environmental conditions that are going to be forcing the populations to evolve in different ways. So natural selection is going to favor adaptations that work in that particular environment. And you can see that side by side. As a human being, you can go from one island to the next and see a finch that is clearly suited to that particular island, or a tortoise that's suited to that particular island, and then go to a different island and see clearly a related tortoise or finch that is different shape and form, so clearly the same ancestral stock, but has changed over the millennia to suit that particular environment of that island. And then, very importantly, the thing that distinguishes the Galapagos, say, from something like the Hawaiian archipelago, is that human beings did not discover the Galapagos for a long, long time. So we didn't get in there and mess with things, bringing in introduced species. So humans are hugely disruptive in terms of covering up the evidence that evolution has existed, as well as dismantling some of the delicate ecosystems that have developed over millions of years to support those particular species of organisms. So anyway, with all those things, those factors are awesome that create this wonderful living laboratory of the Galapagos. The only thing I want to end on here is that the only way that we can make sure that the Galapagos continues to be a great place to study evolution and see evidence of evolution is if you actually don't go there and you don't encourage anybody to go there, because if the tourism industry, which is already rampant there, explodes any more than it is, there's no way that you can help it encroaching on the natural ecosystems. It's just that it's not possible. Human beings and maintaining natural ecosystems, those two can't come together. So anyway, if you want to visit the Galapagos, why don't you just rent a video showing the Galapagos rather than going there? Not quite as fun, but I think it's much better in the end. Okay, crew. See you tomorrow. Bye.